Yeah. All right. Um, so thanks everybody for joining. My name is Stuart Edeal. And welcome to um today's let's see. Uh Monica, I may have you just kind of remind us this is the insurance. Is this the insurance group?
Yes, insurance trailblazers.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm here, we're going to talk about Salesforce Well-Architected around documentation. And this talk kind of started a few sessions ago. Monica was showing us about flow, and we at the end of that discussion, we talked about one of the precursors to flow was design and planning. And I asked the question, how do you all document, or how do you all design your flow? And one of the things, Monica, if there is chat or something that you want me to stop, just go ahead and stop me. I may not be able to see the chat that's going on. But if there is some reason for us to stop and talk about something, feel free to unmute and just
Sure.
wave your arms or whatever and stop me in mid stride. That's fine too. I will introduce myself here. Wow, that's an eyesore. Stuart Edeal. I've been working on the Salesforce platform since 2008. And in that time, I've been Twin Cities community group leader, part of the admin group since 2018, and then switched over to the architect group, helped found the architect group earlier this year, in January of this year, and have spoken at many conferences and many community groups around the country. And over that time, been certified in 28 products and parts of the Salesforce domain. Some of that not necessarily on purpose, some of that on purpose. And if you come to witness success, you'll find out more of that story of my certification path and some of the struggles that came along. I just found out today that I'll be speaking at Witness Success. So I'll have another badge on my conference list. So let's talk more about architecture and design, and why we need good architecture and design. This is something that when I saw Allison Park's discussion about enterprise architecture, this was one of the things that she showed me that I really liked. If we think about architecture like architecting cities, and we think about bad architecture is what we have, no public schools, no public transit. It's everyone out for themselves. There's no common services. There's no scalability. There's no consideration for growth. Everything's kind of built in silos, and the winners get the spoils. The cities were built based on royalty or based on who had the most, who would be built on the tops, and those that were left on the bottoms got nothing. What we want to build in our architecture, even in our Salesforce architecture, is something that's future looking, that has good schools that are located in different parts of the city, that have common services, good roads, good schools, good streets, and that there's common standards, there's safety, there's reliability. Everyone understands the rules. They understand how to get onto a train. They understand how to use the streets. They understand what is going to be required to use the trash, to use the water, to use the sewers. Things are structured and scalable. You can add on to the city without having a massive problem with the water supply or with the electrical supply, and perhaps even internet. Now we can have internet for the entire city or for the entire community. So you think about these things when you're planning. You don't just start to put things together without understanding what is the scale and the scope. And the same thing with planning out your org with documentation. So today we're going to talk about that planning and architecture around documentation. Before you even start to build your org, you would do communication planning. And my old BA world, we talked a lot about communication planning. How do you do communication planning around documentation? What are best practices in your org? Not just the system, but also the org as far as a culture and a people in that org. We're also going to talk about well-architected. So Salesforce has this concept around well-architected. They also talk about documentation in their well-architected framework. And we'll look at that specifically around automation and flows, and to add on to things that Monica has taught us in the past sessions. Some of the examples that we're going to look at are things around data modeling and process mapping and some architectural documentation. And then we'll have time. Like to open it up. Please enter into chat or have some interaction here to talk about how you document in your own orgs. So when we think about what is documentation, and I'd love if you in chat would chime in your own organizations, what do you consider to be documentation? In our org, we have several different, styles of documentation. As an architect, I work with our product teams. My documentation starts in designs and communicating to our engineers about what should go into the architecture of our product. What are some of the curbs around suggestive do's and do nots of our products? But I know that they take those and they'll create tickets. They'll create JIRA tickets around what they're building, and that they use to communicate to the other engineers, the QA teams, and to the end users on what they're building. We'll have our training teams build out training guides. They'll build out videos. They'll build training materials that they'll give to the users and deliver those. Even this PowerPoint slides, these are documentation. These help explain a common understanding of what we're trying to represent via PowerPoint slides. These are all things that are part of documentation. Also, when we think about documentation or communication in general, it's who are we doing this for? Who are the stakeholders or who are the audience that we want to build out this documentation for? First of all, we think about the users of our product, but it's not just that. It's also our colleagues, our developer. My stakeholders are my engineers, the developers that are going to be working with me to build out the products, other architects that I work with to explain again that common understanding of what it is we're building, and why we're building it, and then also the leaders that I report to. I have to explain what it is we're building, why we're building it, and what's the value around we're building. And these are different types of information, different types of communication that I'm doing. What I'm going to explain to my developers and engineers is vastly different than what I'm going to explain to my executive leaders. The other person that I'm documenting for is the future me. Many times I will have an artifact or some content that I'll refer to 6 months or a year later that I'll look at and I'll think, well, there's a lot of gaps. Why did I build that? Why did I do that particular activity? If my documentation is lacking, I'll spend more time trying to recreate my steps than I need to. And so a lot of the times documentation is for me in the future. And then the other question about who I'm documenting for is around where it's stored. If it's meant for a user, it's going to be stored in a very different place than if it's for other architects or for my developers and engineers. So understanding that stakeholder, understanding that end user is very important to the documentation process. And again, we're still in planning. We're still talking about before you even start writing, understanding who it's going to and why it's being used. And the reason why we're still in this planning mode is that there's a big problem with documentation, especially in the Scrum Agile software development cycle. This is a report that came from the University of Calgary, Department of Computer Science. They looked at this study. It said 70% of developers don't use diagrams when they're building in their early stages. And when I was reading this, I was thinking about this meme, this picture up to the side about somebody said, well, let me draw this on the whiteboard. And then they show Monday's whiteboard with a series of lines and graphs. And then on Wednesday, that picture looks completely different. And by Friday, that picture is, again, very different, just based on the fact that now we've learned something new that we didn't know on Monday and we didn't know on Wednesday. And that is a common practice. If you're a consultant or if you're new to a project, this seems to be a common occurrence, a common habit that happens on projects. So how do you manage if you're on a sprint team, if you're on a Scrum team? How do you manage that design progress tracking? Do you do all your documentation, all your design diagramming only at the beginning? Do you continue to update those diagrams, update those documentation as you go along? Do you create a storage place for those artifacts and have version control over those diagrams? Again, this is all part of that planning process around understanding what you're building, creating some process around your documentation. So I'd love to hear some examples. Do you do any sort of documentation? Do you, before you go out and start automating, start building in your org, do you do any sort of documenting? Do you use any tools in your planning process? I'd love to hear from the group if you have any examples of this. And please use chat, or if you want to unmute, please feel free to do so. Oh,
All right, I'll share something.
yeah.
I actually have a object called documentation
Oh,
in Salesforce,
right
so I can search it.
right in the Salesforce org.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Looks like someone that uses Confluence. Nice. That's good. Any other examples in here? Anyone using Microsoft Word? I've got my Microsoft Word has a do not circle around it, because I'm hoping that nobody says that yes, that they do it in Microsoft Word. Although if you did, that's fine too. It's better to have some documentation than none. I'll move on. Oh, that's fine, Tracy. It's okay. It's good. Well, just and it's fine. You'll use Word and have it updated. That's good. Thank you for sharing. In discussions I've had with other user groups, there's a myriad of things that people use. Confluence and Jira is probably one of the top things that people use to do their documentation. Put in the user stories, or Confluence to put in the details around their designs and share it with others. I know at our organization, we use draw.io a lot to create images, and you'll see some later in my presentation of how we use that. A lot of these are around images and text. So when I think of documentation, I think of using both pictures and text at the same time, because pictures will tell you a lot, and then words will give you more information about those pictures. Excuse me. We think about the documentation process. And you don't have to follow this. This is a template that I've seen in the past. This was shared on a Salesforce broadcast a couple years ago. You can think about this process in planning. When you plan, think about using a template. And I'll show you an example of a template that we use at our org that seems to work very well. But when you start to use a template, configure that template, tweak it as you go along, and it doesn't have to be complicated. But when you start to use that template over and over again, you'll see that actually is your friend when you're documenting your org. Start writing as soon as you understand the needs or understand the project. Don't wait until the end. As soon as you hear about a need or are introduced to a problem or a project, start writing it down. Use that template to say, here's users need to have a new button on a field, or users need to have a process that involves a workflow, or needs a new system to put in. Just start writing that documentation, and then revise it as you learn more, as you are introduced to more integrations perhaps. But add on to that document. Share ideas and ask for help from your colleagues or from your business stakeholders. I love to ask for help, and I will always ask perhaps even the dumb question in the room. I'll come in and say, I wrote something, I've got blanks here. Can you help me fill in the blanks? Because I don't understand exactly what you're trying to do, what you're wanting me to automate, how you want me to automate it. Please help me to figure this out. And then at some point in time, you're going to want to publish this to share this with others about what you're trying to build. And the final one is to teach. The best way to learn something is to teach it to others. You'll find out that you'll gain a lot of knowledge by trying to teach this and presenting it to others by cross-training the team. you will actually get a lot of feedback from that and see where there might be gaps or errors in your documentation that you can then fix. In the Salesforce Well-Architected Framework, we talked about this, that there is, well, let's see, there's 3 parts to this. There are, I'm just showing the easy part of it. There in the easy leg of the well-architected framework is really where we're going to look at documentation. And when they talk about the easy solution, it's one that delivers value that is intentional, automated, and engaging. And kind of dive into that here. Dive into it. And if we look at the intentional part of that, intentional talks about things that are prioritized. Intentional used to be called simple until just like maybe a week ago. They changed this from simple to now intentional, and I think that's a good change. I liked simple, but I think intentional probably hits the mark better. Intentional talks about prioritization, road mapping, governance, maintainability, standard versus custom, technical debt, and then readability, design standards, and documentation. And this is where this documentation, the design part of this talks about understanding the impact of your deliverables, maintaining your documentation, following your build patterns, and fostering a governance that includes a roadmap. And I'll share this. I'll share the slides with you. There's a lot of tools in here that are links to different places in Salesforce Help that talk about tools of design patterns, 5 document strategies, things that you can use in your documentation, learning, and guidance that Salesforce helps you in understanding the documentation part of the Salesforce Well-Architected framework more. But just so you know, having well-planned, intentional documentation is certainly something that well-architected framework is part of. Now, how do we use it at my org? When we start out with, again, we talked about you plan with a template. We created a template for our architecture. Our architecture documentation includes both words and pictures. And here's kind of the layout. We have an overview of the project. It's a high level. It just explains the vision of this project. What are we trying to do? What's the value? What is the mission and goal of this project? It doesn't have to be anything grand. Even for simple projects, it's just explaining, here is what we are trying to get out of this project. We want to explain the business problem. We're not here to build products just because it's fun. We want to actually solve some business problem. Along with that business problem, we want to understand the origination of it. Who asked for it? What was there a specific business department or a specific stakeholder that asked for that? And what was the context of that ask? That helps us to build out the scope and the scale of the solution. Then we have a section in here called architecture that explains the current state architecture and the future state architecture. I'll dive into that in a second. And then we'll have supporting information. Supporting information can have a bunch of information about the discovery process. What did we do to really understand the pain, the business problem? Are there any user stories that come along with it? Were there any design details, any assets that we can pull into this template that we can add to help understand this this story or this this problem? We look at the architecture in both current state and future state. There's 3 assets that I really want to have as part of our architecture diagram or our architecture template. First one being a diagram or set of diagrams, a data model, and business process models, or you could call them journey maps. The diagrams can be really simple. They don't have to be too complicated. You'll see two diagrams here that we've created in the past. These could be considered to be like cocktail napkin diagrams. They're pretty simple. We have maybe objects here or processes here. This one is based on a task managing tool where we would have some business processes that are broken down into task items and then given to users or to contacts or accounts. And they just show a pattern or a process that we want to monitor or to show inside of Salesforce. Now, what we do with this set of diagrams is explain them out using words, but we would use this set of pictures to help explain our process. Down below, we would have another set of pictures that might explain those objects in more detail. We've got these objects that talk about the security and visibility around those objects, grouping of perhaps the priority around these objects and how they relate to each other. The other thing that I want to have in every architecture template is a data model. The data model is important because it captures those business entities, the business model, and the relationship between those business entities. I want to understand what it is that the business is looking for building, and it serves as a communication tool between both myself and the business stakeholders, and then myself and the development team. What does that data model look like? Well, it's got three pieces. The entity is merely the person, thing, or concept that we're trying to use as a holding tool or as a data tool. And then a relationship, perhaps if there's more than one data object, and then attributes about that data object. Those are characteristics about that data that need to be maintained. So color, size, price, etc. On this one, entity 2 has name, age, address. So this probably is a person, or it could be a pet, but you can get the idea of that this entity, this data object, has certain characteristics that are associated with it. And so this helps to explain through the data model what it is that we're trying to build. The conceptual data model can get bigger here. By looking at it, you can kind of understand what it is that we're building. Here we have the certain entities that all kind of match up to each other. And as we look at the data model, we can understand we have things like a rail ticket that is associated to a train station, that is associated to a scenic stop, associated to track line, and so on. After looking at the data model, you can start to get the idea that we are maybe building something for a rail line, for a train track, for some sort of a train or scenic railroad. This one does have the cardinality in it. You wouldn't necessarily need to get that detailed at this point in time. But the relationship shows what that business entity is for. The other thing in here is the data dictionary. Kind of talks about what those data elements are, the description of them, how they're formatted, and what some valid fields are, and comments about those fields. Another thing, if we're moving data back and forth, what I'd like to see is some data mapping. It shows the relationships between source and target. An example of that would be source here, where if fields are moving from one source, we'd show how they're formatted, and then the destination and how those are formatted. Now, why this is all important, and especially for things like flow, is as I was putting this together, we were looking at LinkedIn one day, and I saw this this comment on LinkedIn, and someone was saying, you know, Ohana, the best way to get better at flow is to start building a flow. And someone responded saying, well, I'd add an earlier step, start by designing your flow process. And they said, well, I think that someone that's learning may not know anything about processing or designing. That could be true. What I saw later on LinkedIn, just an hour later, was someone that posted this. And there were 75 comments and 3 reposts. And the comments weren't all that positive. There were some perhaps even crude comments about how would you be able to understand this? Some funny comments. But it just made me think that yeah, it would be hard. It'd be hard to understand without some sort of documentation, without some sort of planning. How would you hand this flow over to a coworker, over to another person, and really have them understand what's going on in this process? And so one of the things that I ask my team is, before you start to build a flow, is to start out with process mapping. And this is maybe one of the most important things, is to really understand what is the business goal of that automation process. You know, identify the outputs and identify the inputs, and even map it out. Again, it doesn't have to be all that technical. It can start out to be simple, but you identify the triggers and the actions that are being performed in that process. In our train example of that train station, what are you trying to do? And what are the major decision points along the way? So in our example, well, we'd have a visitor that selects tickets. We might have a system that queries to see if there are any tickets available. Are there tickets available? Yes, no. Then it would go one way or the other. And the system might send the results to the visitor. And this is a pretty simple example, not as complicated as the one that I showed on the LinkedIn picture. But we can start to kind of get the idea of, we want to understand the examples. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because we start to get an idea of what are the different things that can happen along the way. One of the things that I've asked my team to do is to start looking at that process in different ways. Again, we haven't even built a flow yet. We're just looking at process. So one of the things you can do is add a swim lane. Swim lane takes each character, each person or system in the process, and divides them out just to look at what their part of the process is. So the customer, the visitor here, initiates that process by logging on and selecting a ticket. And then the system here, Salesforce, will start to do the processing. We'll query available tickets. We'll ask the question if tickets are available. And then depending on the yes or the no answer, will go to a different, in this case, person. It'll go into a queue, to a ticket manager or to a concierge. And then based on that answer, the system will get the results, send the results to a visitor and perhaps to an email. There'll just be decisions to be made on, well, what happens next? Is there a case made? Is there an email made? We need to figure out that business process first. The other things that can be done here is we can figure out some KPIs here. Do we need to figure out how many times the ticket manager is being called or is making a decision? Do we need to figure out how many times that the concierge is making a decision? Do we need to figure out if there are fault conditions or error conditions that need to be created at each step? Do we need to have context of what's the timing of this? Are there location issues? Are there conditions for validation or verification that happens at each step? Kind of by looking at this process in a different view in this swim lane, we can figure out the different process and sub-processes. Is there more information, perhaps external data that needs to be provided to these different users to see if there's tickets available? Would there be an external system that needs to be brought in to look at more data? So before you even start writing out your flow, I would suggest map this out. Have this be part of your documentation. And Salesforce also has this as part of their well-architected framework as well. You outline the automation's purpose, document every step, you look at the entry criteria, and you check for gaps in your logic. Adam White on the admin.salesforce.com blog has 10 flow planning checklist items that these are great. Always make sure that you check these in your planning process, even before you start building out your flow. And again, I'll share these slides, and there's a bunch of resources here that will help with your documentation process, and also with some of these flow reminder process on how to configure and build out your flow better. And that was my run through on flow, why you should plan out and document your flow before you even start. And thank you for sticking with me.
That was awesome. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I have to confess, I don't always follow everything on there. And I think that's probably true of most of us. But it's good to aim for.
Well, and following everything on there, it's not. Let's see. Yeah, that is a goal. I mean, you may not always hit the goal, but it's good to have. I think it's always good to have a template. We always try and start with a template. The template's not always filled out on every single project, but within our teams, we always start with that template and say, it reminds us to know, what are we building, and to always focus on the customer, and to make sure that we're not trying to step through, step over processes, because we'll always have gaps. I know that we will have debates about, why are we spending time trying to figure out requirements or trying to figure out the ways to do things. But the problem is that if we don't, we will spend way much more time later trying to solve problems that we could have fixed earlier on in the process.
Or avoided.
Yes, that's true.
Very true. Does anybody have questions? Comments?
It was really
All right. Just speak up.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry. I'm Pooja from Greece Technolabs. We have just started, Commerce Cloud recently, and we are still exploring our ideas. Basically, our company is a prominent partner of Magento, but now we have started the Salesforce. We have done 1 or 2 projects and few certified developers we are having. So yeah, it was really good, great session and good insights I got.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think these are the things that I'm sure, Stuart, a lot of this you've learned in the real world.
Yeah. Definitely. Some of it the hard way.
And that's the best way sometimes. You don't forget it.
Nope.
All right. That was great. That definitely fills in some learning gaps, and it looks like I have a lot of homework looking back through some of that, some of your resources. I know that Danielle will be posting this video because a lot of people RSVP intending to catch the video later. So thank you to all of those people, and thank you to Stuart, and we'll have the slide deck. Yes, you'll provide that at some point. That's like gold, that slide deck.
I'll get that to you. Yep.
Awesome. Are you presenting this session somewhere else? Is this?
I'll be presenting some of this information at Midwest Dreamin'.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a little bit of a revised version of this, and showing some demonstrations on the easy leg of the well-architected framework, along with some demonstration. I'm hoping that the internet works in Minneapolis.
Right.
But have some examples on some interesting things that you can do to make the user experience visual and helpful. Yeah, and getting on that train, the railroad theme.
Oh, excellent.
So yeah.
Looking forward to that. Hopefully that's not conflicting with one of my sessions there. That's great. And yeah, so thank you everybody for joining us, and for everyone that's going to join later and see this offline. And we appreciate it. And we'll be posting another edition, another session up shortly on the Trailblazer community. So everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks,
Really
Monica.
appreciate you being here.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.